Just sort of important topic, but sort of quick thing is way too binary. The should access be open or not is, I would say, almost exactly the wrong question to ask. The question is something like, when should access be open? When should it not? What are the circumstances with which you choose those? What are the criterion we use, right? Should inventions be protected by patents, you're asking, or by something else? Which level of analysis do we want to protect? Which set of the frame? This discussion cannot be about open access or not at any level, or it won't get anywhere useful at all.
So you think it would be useful? Sorry, it would be useful to have like a second dimension. I mean, we talked with Ken before, and he said that a dilemma, the two poles, open or not open, is not enough. We would have to have like an additional dimension. Could you say that in several cases, yes and no, and to make this more fine-grained and more...
By professional responsibility, all political scientists must put things in 2x2 matrices. But, yeah, a second dimension is a good start, right? But you can't split this out from the other things, right? The intellectual property structure that you choose is going to be dependent upon the underlying nature of the technology, the social goals that you are trying to achieve, the commercial goals that you're trying to achieve, right? So this is not a separable thing where you can ask a question like this, right? It has to be much more granular than that and bring in a lot more different factors about how, right? The real question about IP, to my mind, is what are the criteria we're going to use to decide what structure we want, not what the structure, yeah.
You would do enormous good in writing down what you think the objective function is the idea to have the benefits of synthetic biology go to as many human beings on the surface of the Earth as possible. Something like that, and leave the mechanism design details. This really is like looking at an equation and trying to solve it. You can't guess what the mechanism will produce. What you need to do is say what you think all human beings agree the goal should be, and that's a tough thing to do. And then you've done a huge thing, because now you have a well-defined problem and people can argue about details, but they can prove to each other when they're wrong. That changes the discussion. It would be very helpful to say what you think IP's policies goals should be, and to be very cruel and try and keep them to just a couple of goals, so it's not such an impossibly complex thing that it is intractable. But simplifying what you're trying to do would be much better than trying to specify the mechanism.
This somewhat echoes what's been said, I think. I found, particularly looking at the sort of opening paragraph there, like you're conflating different perspectives on IP. That you're sort of saying, given that it's based on living organisms, is that saying because there's concerns about patents on life? That's a moral question. Given that there's going to be upcoming intellectual property issues, that's a sort of technical question about contestation that's going to be happening in this field. Given that this is novel, you're conflating different things, and one of the big issues that intellectual property raises is not about is not so much about where the benefits accrue, although that's important, so much as how it changes power relations more generally. But it's sort of about the benefits, but it's more about intellectual, certain intellectual property systems will enhance the power of certain players, which will then have societal effects and effects on the market and so forth. So I don't know how that's captured there.
So, for example, we could have it in sort of two subsections, saying the first one would be really a question of ownership of life, etc., these things, and the second one a question rather of application and access to applications and to the knowledge that sort of accrues from the science. Would people be happier with this? Some further comments?
Well, I guess this will need some little bit more work in order to make it more clear and to lay it out. But you will have a chance to comment on that as well if we send it out the next version. As the time proceeds, I'd like to come to the next point, which is on public perception and engagement. Although some lessons can be learned, the analogy to past debates on genetic engineering may have its limits. It seems, however, that scientists would certainly be well advised to adopt an open approach towards the public and engage in ethical discussions that go beyond factual information about scientific and technological advances.
First question, are you talking about public perception and public engagement, or public perception and engagement between different stakeholders.
Engagement between different stakeholders.
Right, that needs to be clear,
Okay.
because I read it as public engagement,
Okay.
which of course is one-sided as well. And that also goes on to the issue of how you use the word engage here. It's a little bit fuzzy, because of course engagement is a two-way process where everybody involved has got to be prepared to actually change their position or their stance. And I think that really needs to be clarified here.
Well, the idea what I've seen as concepts from the scientific community, when they think about that synthetic biology could reenact the GMO debate, they want to the initial reflex is to give better information, to tell the truth, the scientific truth, and then people will understand and agree with them. And I think it's not that easy. That it would be a one-way kind of communication, and like to see a more bi-directional thing.
The scientists have got to be prepared to change their stance as well as everybody else.
And then another thing here is that talking about the scientific facts, it will always be like a very different. The participants in the discussion will have a different standing. You know, the scientists can know all the facts, and the other people, our stakeholders, might not be well informed about it. And so it's not done. Not a discussion that's very fruitful in a certain sense. It has to be done. It has to be. Someone that has to will engage has to learn about it at least a little bit. But I think that there's an entry door into a meaningful discussion on the same playing field if they talk about the ethical implications of that. But because everybody can participate and talk about that, it's more, let's say, a democratic kind of discussion. Jim?
I'm really concerned to see the term public perception. Public perception is a public relations term, and it presumes that this is about trying to mold public perception to be accommodating to whatever's going on in synthetic biology, as opposed to a democratic model, which is public values and understanding public values and bringing those through engagement into decision making. So why you use this language of public perception rather than understanding public values and then reflecting that in decisions? I'm confused by.
I think that there's a working model on how to deal with the public based on the imagination of what the public or the publics could think about it. So what Eleanor and the Wilson Center have done, they have for the first time asked people, what do you think about it? Okay, most of the people don't know anything about it, but they have some ideas. And the first step would be to find out what are their existing ideas towards synthetic biology as a starting point, to see where can we start to find this, to engage in this debate. Because otherwise it's just a preconception of other people could think and then act according to that. So we have to know what do the scientists think, civil society organizations and other people that not engage in that as a first round in order to start something like that.
I think you also have to bear in mind who the target audience, or at least my understanding of the target audience is for this. If the idea is this is a document for synthetic biologists, I presume they're coming from the point of view that synthetic biology is good. So you're then talking about trying to persuade everybody else that synthetic biology is good, and I think that is a perception issue, not a... You know, if you didn't agree with synthetic biology, you wouldn't be a synthetic biologist, maybe.
So this is for this is a document that a group of an academic group is bringing to the European Union, to regulators and legislators, to think about how they should move forward on synthetic biology. It's about what's the appropriate way to move forward on synthetic biology. It's not about how do we get the public to accept synthetic biology. Or is it? Is that actually what you're trying to do?
I mean, it could well be that, I'm assuming, a hypothesis that the ETC is the only group in the world that is concerned about synthetic biology and everybody else is very happy. I don't think it's that way, but in order to find out how people think about it and what's their initial reaction to it, we have to learn what people think about it, and that's about public perception, like laying the foundation for dialogue.
But that is only the beginning.
Yeah, sure.
The goal here would be something more than. I mean, the goal is not
the engagement, no?
Yeah, I think we weren't very clear when we wrote the title. The term public perception is certainly not meant to be paternalistic in the way it's being read as paternalistic. The idea is to say, as Marcus said, what are the factual informations that the public understand or misunderstands, which we can potentially clarify in order to have a platform, an engaged platform with the public, where the information is a two-way flow and not from science to the public.
the way you're describing it, Marcus, makes sense. But I agree with Jim that putting it all under the umbrella of public perception is
That's where the term engagement is also here, no?
Yeah, perhaps we should just get rid of perception in the title and,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
phrase it differently.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the different stages are going to be of this. I mean, you said surveys and probing kind of what the public perceptions are, or what they think of it generally, and then is there a follow-up stage where you're planning to conduct focus groups or engage? Yeah, just tell me a little bit about the methodology and also maybe the goals at each kind of step of the methodology. Again, a question of goals.
Actually, to realize this, it would be a different activity following SymBioSafe. I mean, what the Wilson Center has done and what my colleagues in another project are doing in Austria, they conducted some focus groups in order to present people with this concept of synthetic biology. There are some people doing something like that at the moment, and some more things might precipitate in the future, and then see what the reactions are. We thought about having a survey and asking people detail about this new field, but it's not very useful at this stage, as hardly anybody knows about it. I mean, in the United States, it's like 10% or so that have heard the term, and most of them cannot describe what it is. So it's too early in that way. So.
And one more question, I guess, would be how are you finding this public, and who is your public, and how are you going to get them to participate?
Okay, I know that the term public is very, very misleading in that sense. There are several publics, and we cannot treat it as one entity and so on. But I mean, there are certain methods also in social science in order to engage people, be it a World Cafe, a scenario workshop, focus group, different kinds of engaging people into the discussion. And this is more up to the social scientists to find the right tool in order to do that fits to this kind of endeavor. I mean, there's between I think it was Technology Assessment Institute in the Netherlands, I think maybe Rathenau and the Austrian Institute of Technology Assessment, they come up with a full book of different kinds of engagement methods and explaining what are the benefits, how much they cost, which kind of situation you might use them. This is like a methodology collection for social scientists in order to involve different publics. It has to be defined in a later stage, but the first thing is to have a consensus that this should be done, okay, and then find out how we do it a certain way. Okay, one more.
I just wanted to clarify that the purpose of public perception is not only to inform about how the public could be a market oversight or this kind of brainwashing or brainstorming, but the idea, I mean, trying to better assess public perception could be a way also to use the knowledge of public, the local knowledge, and maybe also try to have to get answers about questions like what application seem problematic for the public in terms of public safety or health, how we can actually enhance public confidence towards the regulatory agencies or towards the scientific agencies, scientific institutes, and also who needs to be involved in the oversight system. And for example, what we learned from the focus group we organized is that the public and whoever it is, so maybe the participants of the focus group were quite clear about the fact that we would need a kind of check and balance systems for oversight. So regulatory agencies looking at what the scientific institutes are doing, or that's a kind of answer and knowledge that is quite interesting for building further oversight system.
Very two short comments, Jim.
So I agree with what you say, Eleanor, but I think the language there isn't public perception, it's public values. And what needs to happen, what this is pointing to is there needs to be a way of divining, working out what are the public values that are brought to synthetic biology, and how can developments in synthetic biology and governance of synthetic biology properly reflect those public values as opposed to other values that might be driving synthetic biology. So that would be a better framing, I think.
I think this section suffers from what a number of the other sections suffer from in that is there isn't a clearly defined goal here, as we've discussed. You're really looking at mechanisms rather than goals, and I think if you can really clearly define what you're trying to achieve here, things will fall into place a lot more.
We can do that. I think the ultimate goal is to have a multi-stakeholder kind of engagement. That's the goal, and we have to write it down more clearly in order that it comes out. Very short.
Very short. I'm not clear on sort of a second reading on what the relationship between this last section is and the second bullet under the ethics section, which calls for an open and engaged ethical debate. When I actually first read that second bullet, without the benefit of the bolding that you use on your slide, I actually thought that you were calling attention to a consequentialist concern, not to this sort of process concern. So it seems to me that there are maybe an assortment of questions about process that need to be brought together and more explicitly labeled as such. Your point about the airing of the different values, of the different sort of moral approaches or frames that people are bringing to it, that's part of it. One of the things I like about this second bullet is this open, engaged ethical debate is needed on the various applications of synthetic bio. And there I take it part of the point there is that the debate needs to attend to specific types of activities and needs to be grounded in the facts. I guess you've got a bunch of substantive concerns elsewhere, but maybe there needs to be, instead of this public perception, have a section that is basically about process and then bring together 3 or 4 different issues there.
Okay. Thanks. Coming to the last point, Anna.
So this last point you find under the perception point. It's just the second bullet point there. Regulation is no guarantee for public acceptance, although imminent safety and security issues must be taken seriously. Nanotechnology provides examples that in certain contexts flexible forms of governance may be more appropriate than strict regulation. So also here we realized from the comments that we received that it was problematic to use nanotechnology here as an example, and we will certainly take that out. What we wanted to say with that is that we thought a good nanotechnology in a way made a step in the right direction by including other stakeholders and asking them for considering their views, but we see the point that maybe not everything what went on there is ideal. So we don't use it as a model anymore.
So I'm very glad to hear you're taking out that reference to nanotechnology, because completely, so flatly disagree with that. The regulation is no guarantee for public acceptance has, to me that sounds like you're saying the point of regulation is public acceptance, and that's not true. The point of regulation, I hope, is the public good, public safety and fair and equitable lives, and that's not, the point of regulation is not to get acceptance for a technology. So I don't understand why you put that up front and bolded it in that way. It's an interesting comment, but it makes more sense to say, you're saying regulation needs to happen because of safety and security issues must be taken seriously. Full stop.
Okay, coming to the first one, I think on nanotechnology, what we've seen in Europe over what GM crops, and also you've mentioned it in the e-conference, that we see that there's now, with nanotechnology, they try to have a new way to deal with new technologies, different than from 15 years ago. I think they're moving into the right direction. Not all perfect, and still we have to see how it turns out.
You won't get a consensus on that. You absolutely won't. That might be your personal opinion.
It's not that we say that nanotechnology, the way it's managed in a good way. We see that there's a movement in thinking about different forms of regulation that are more flexible. than they were before. Okay, so that's the message. We have to see that it's necessary to frame it in that way, to make clear that it can be more beneficial to have different kinds of flexible formats of regulations than we had in the past. Okay, so that's the idea behind it.
But again, unless you can point to examples of that working, why would you say that? Where's your consensus on that? Because I don't think you'd get the consensus that the nanotechnology. Andrew's shaking his head. He's got a better sense of this than I do. He's working more closely, but.
So in my interviews, there is a consensus, I think, that the people in the profession have, that whether or not there is government regulation, as individual actors and as individuals who band together to act as a group, the power you get from that is balanced by you have a responsibility. So the fact that government does or doesn't have regulations, if you talk to people, they come around very quickly to the viewpoint, which I think is fairly obvious, that does not relieve me of the personal obligation to be safe, whether there are government regulations or not. And perhaps more interestingly, it does not relieve me when I band together with other people in a group, for that group to behave in a moral and ethical and careful way. And it seems to me that if you phrased it that way, you would again be untangling mechanism from goals. I think it's empirically true in the world that there are some problems because synthetic biology is so international and so tied to markets that are very hard to regulate and very hard to govern by treaties. So I think empirically it's true that community is often a very powerful goal, but I think you could get consensus pretty quickly that just people understand that when they band together as a group, they then have moral responsibilities to go with the power they've achieved by acting as a group, and that they're also responsible as individuals.
Provide you with some feedback that I've heard, and I stand quite happily to be corrected in this, but I think if you go out there and speak to industry in a biological context and ask them the simple question of, are you strictly regulated with regards to safety and security, they'll say yes. And I know what you're looking at is measures needed additionally for synthetic biology on top of biotechnology and standard safety and security measures. But the point I'm coming round to is, although there is without a doubt uses and in certain contexts flexible forms of governance being incredibly powerful, it's not a case of one or the other. You will find with synthetic biology, in certain aspects, if it's nothing more than making it illegal to use it to make a weapon, there will be laws, there will be strict controls, there will be top-down regulation. It's finding the right balance and the right tools for the job. And I think that the drive on the governance aspect is about balance, is about matching approaches to the reality of risks and threats and possibilities.
Actually, that maybe I didn't say that clear enough. I think that what I meant was flexible formats of regulation. That's exactly what I meant by that, to see in which situation you can use which kind of tool.
I'm sorry. I understand that these people are in for European peoples. Yes. But I want to at some point comment on the situation in China. I remember several years ago we do a joint perception between China and Australia. It was proved that Chinese people is much more believed in government. And when if government said this one is safety, it is safe, and people would like to believe. So it's have different situation in China.
Do you think you should have a, if we would to give that to a Chinese ministry or policymakers, we should change this section?
Yes, I think so, because the situation is different.
Right. Maybe you can help us in formulating it.
We'll see.
Okay, so it's some more comments. Yeah, Pierce.
Just to follow up on that, you'll find that you wouldn't get that response only just with China. I can name you other countries where the sort of public bottom-up approach just doesn't happen because of the way the country works.
Even in Eastern Europe, it's not that way now.
I was just thinking maybe this paragraph should be rephrased, but the idea of the flexible forms of governance was linked to this idea of the code of conduct in nanotechnology. That was the origin of the concept. We had a discussion about that. So it's a really specific context linked to Europe, and the fact that the European Union is using recommendation or directives or this kind of different form of law, sometimes soft law, and this code of conduct was really specific to the situation of Europe, and the fact that they try actually to include some part of the society, of the research, of the regulatory sphere. So it's maybe it doesn't have a place in this paragraph because it's too specific, but I think it was interesting to mention this kind of new form of governance or soft law for an emerging technology. So,
do you think that something like that, a code of conduct, like it has been done for nanotechnology in Europe, could be a role model, a blueprint for a code of conduct for synthetic biology in Europe?
Well, we should see what will happen with this code of conduct for nanotechnology. The problem is that in Europe, when you have a regulation at the EU level, then you have to implement it at the national level, and each situation is different for each country. So that's one of the difficulty in European regulation, and it's why the concept of code of conduct was interesting in this specific situation. But it's maybe too early to mention that in this context.
Just add to that, I think, the idea of code of conduct is especially nice in the context of biosafety and security, but it certainly doesn't address some of the broader issues like equity and justice and things like that, I suppose.
I hate to flog a dead horse with the nanotechnology bit. I first of all just want to clarify that we haven't really learned anything with nanotechnology yet. There's been a lot of talk, but no action. But the other thing is, more important with this last sentence, there have always been flexible forms of governance and oversight. There's a very complex toolbox that people use. Strict regulation, and if by that you mean hard regulation coming from governments, is always the crudest sort of form of regulation, always sort of the last line of regulation. There have always been soft forms of regulation underneath that. And the question is just how do you sort of work within that toolbox, and are there new tools that we need? But that's something which is evolving across the areas of emerging technologies, but there are a lot of sophisticated tools already out there.
Okay, thanks.
My big reservation about this is that I don't know what's here that's specific to synthetic biology. And does synthetic biology present different and unique governance issues? I think it may, actually, but I don't get that from here. So it's worth backing up a little bit and asking the question, what is it about SynBio that, and let me then, having said that, let me suggest a possible answer, right? That what may make SynBio different from other forms of biotechnology and different is the potential for substantial changes over very short periods of time in capabilities and potentials. And what that suggests to me that, along with sort of spelling that out, which is important to say, why exactly is this a different problem? That in general, when you talk about highly uncertain and rapidly changing environments, the imperative becomes flexibility and resilience as opposed to foresight and sort of strict rules, right? So your governance code might be better off saying something like, SynBio may call for a unique or different set of regulations than previous technologies because of certain of its characteristics. And the guiding principle behind such frameworks might be things like resilience, flexibility, adaptation, learning, modification, right? As opposed to the traditional proscriptive and prescriptive rules that regulations are usually based around.
Okay. Any more comments? If not, I would like to thank you for your contributions. They're very helpful, and it will not be an easy task to incorporate it, but we'll try our best and send you a revised version of our priority paper, probably with some more comments on the back of it to clarify it. And thanks a lot again. And if you have not signed up already, you may do so. Otherwise, you will hear from us in the future. Jim?
Thank you very much for giving everyone the chance to go through this and offer comments. Just to clarify, you're presenting this as a consensus paper. It's the consensus of who? It's the consensus of your group, and you've taken these comments as input into it, or will it be presented as the consensus of everybody you've spoken with? In which case, that's
if you look at the paper, it says a priority paper because when we came closer to the conference, we thought about that a little bit more deeply, and probably we might not get a consensus of everybody in the field, whoever that is, and who would define it. So what we do at least is to have a priority paper as an outcome of SynBioSafe, in case that a lot of people sign up to it, like a significant amount of people, like people here or others that have commented by email. We might think about naming it a consensus paper if the people agree on it. But I think it's not our main goal to have a consensus in that way that we get as much people as possible, but have clear, but to set priorities as an outcome of our project. So the main aim is to have a priority paper. It could lead to a consensus paper in the future, but it's yeah.
But could I just ask as a follow-up question as to if we hand this in as a priority paper, saying that we went through this and this and this process and these people were involved, could you imagine that we could ask all of you or whoever commented to acknowledge the fact that you participated in this process?
There's a difference between saying you participated and saying you endorse.
Exactly.
And that's the line I'm trying to understand.
Right. Yeah, right. But if it's participation in the process, perhaps there's something we could consider asking.
Sure. So long as the paper makes clear that it's not an agreed position.
Absolutely.
It's the result of a set of discussions which you've drafted or based on that.
We will certainly not say that you endorse it without asking you prior to that. So that make sure that. Okay. So thanks a lot, and I'd like to conclude the sessions. Thank you very much.